Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Kris Breen.
I sat down with Kris and Jeff from Early Birds Marketplace. This was such a great interview. They were both so very frank about the reality of the industry in terms of startups and how they're merging more into corporate capabilities. Jeff and Kris talk about their company Early Birds and what they're doing in the space and how they plan to change the conversation at the enterprise level about looking to tech startups to add serious uplift to an organisation. If you're keen to learn more about Early Birds or how your startup can get involved, then please keep on listening. Okay, Kris, Jeff, welcome. How are you guys going today?
Yeah, very good, very good.
I'm really keen to dive on into what you guys do and a few of the issues that I'm sort of seeing in the market. I'd love you guys to give a little bit of clarity on that in terms of the startup space. So before we dive on into those questions specifically, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So can you guys both walk through your journey, like where you started to what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely we can. Kris, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Kris, for the opportunity to talk to you. So I actually, my name is Poria. So I started, I was born in India, and after my university, I started my own business in IT in 90s, and then, of course, got interest in software. And then sold my business to get into software development as a programmer, worked across a couple of countries, including Asia and then Europe, then US, and came down to Australia and worked in different roles, included, started my media business actually in 2009-10. After my media business, I worked with various organizations, especially IT organizations, including global system integrators and a company called Oracle. And that was the time when actually I met Jeff. I was based in Australia, but Jeff was based in London. So maybe I'll ask Jeff to cover his side of the journey.
Yeah, thank you, Kris. So my first career was in federal government. I had a long career in federal government, working all over Australia and in Canberra. And I had the opportunity to leave 18 years ago, actually, and join the private sector, which I grasped, and spent time working with startups, tech startups here in Australia. Then in the UK, and that led me to work with organisations like venture capital companies, then other large multinational tech companies like Oracle and IBM. So as Kris said, I spent quite a bit of time working out of the UK in roles across Europe, Middle East and Africa. I got to know Kris during my Oracle days, so I've had quite a bit of experience working with customers in the technology space. I came back to Australia about 3 years ago, again to work with a scale-up, and that's during that time that Kris and I got to rekindle our relationship, and it's circumstances during that time that led to us creating Early Birds.
So you've got, just to touch on that a little bit more, Jeff, you've got quite a long career working across, well, the government space, but also just looking at startups in general. Would you say that sort of sparked the genesis for creating Early Birds, would you say, in terms of what you've seen? What do you think is missing in the market?
Absolutely, and it's a actual event that occurred that Kris experienced, where he had a very great opportunity for an Australian startup, and I was working for an Australian startup / scale-up, and it's those circumstances that led us to create Early Birds. And yes, I've had quite a bit of experience working with startups and scale-ups here and overseas.
Wow, okay. No, I really do love what you guys do. And so for people listening, I am aware of what these guys do. I've introduced a fair few people to these guys, and I really love in terms of their business model, what they're trying to do. And I really wanted to shed some light on that today on this episode. So can you guys just tell our listeners, like, what do you guys do day to day? Like, what does that look like? What types of projects do you get involved in? How do startups get involved?
Okay. Maybe Kris could explain the background of why we do this, and then that'll lead to the day-to-day activities. So, Kris, if you'd like to tell our story, to set the scene, and then we'll go into how we interact with those various components of the market.
Yeah, sure. And Jeff, thank you for that. And so, Kris, when I was working, actually, after Oracle, I joined a large system integrator. And I was working with as Jeff said, working with a large state government agency on a transformation project here in Australia. And during that time, basically, Jeff was working for this startup. And as part of this project I was working for, there was a requirement to create a new project for multi-cloud environment, and the company that Jeff was working for had a multi-cloud management solution that was fit for purpose. And following a lot of positive meetings with our tech team, architects, and all others, it looks very positive. But then we couldn't get approval from our head office in US. So eventually, my company at that time decided to build a solution from scratch and leave the local off-the-shelf product. In that case, we felt there was no winner. And the customer got a bespoke solution. The revenue and skills for this component went offshore, and the local startup missed a great opportunity. So what we did after this, we got together as we thought something should be done about this. Initially, we thought we would provide a business development and sales as a service to potentially to 6 to 8 local startups and scale-ups. But the more we looked into this, we realized this approach would not scale. And this problem was much larger, and it was a global problem. We then decided to build a platform to link innovators, especially tech startups and scale-ups, with early adopter private and public sector organizations. So innovators can basically list their offering with a price, upload all the relevant collateral, videos, all of the use cases for including can use our own sales contract or their own sales contract if they have to. And similarly, early adopters can also list a challenge and publish their requirement. So we have spent a lot of time actually interacting with many incubators and accelerators here in Australia as well as globally. And we feel we are very highly complementary to these and pick up the excellent work they have already done with these innovators. And it is our job to help them navigate the value of that to commercialization. So our platform is designed actually to be self-service, where matching occurs based on the industry, business function, and the business outcome. So we have got that insight when we were doing a lot of research with both sides, early adopters as well as innovators. They can also communicate with each other, set up a sale or take on a challenge through the platform. But on the other hand, while we were road testing this with our customers, some early adopters advised us that they could not list their challenge due to commercial sensitivities or a security concern. So they also advised us that innovators found it difficult to engage with early adopters. So basically what we did is to overcome the challenge of that commercial sensitivities or security concerns, we created a third pillar in the platform a service component with subject matter expert independent consultants who work with early adopters on their challenges. We also created a highly focused short cycle consulting program called Challenger. The Challenger program is designed to work with early adopters to define on challenge and then search for relevant innovators that meet the business, technical and commercial, as well as risk requirements for the customer. And the early adopter can evaluate these innovators. Then we can publish a roadmap on the way forward as we progress through the Challenger program. We also launched another program called a Explorer program, which is more of innovation as a service, where early adopters get access to our subject matter experts and also our big data pool of over 1 million innovators. Along with our weekly webinars, we got a disruptive weekly webinars with our innovators that we provide access to our customers as well as our subject matter experts. And that's how we run those kind of two programs. So in terms of day-to-day basis, of course, it depends because we got a CFO as well as we got two vice presidents who look after our subject matter experts ecosystem and customer engagement. Right now, we got close to 100 SMEs on board already. We have also signed up an exclusive agreement with Union of Arab Banks to be their innovation platform across 20 countries and 360 banks and financial institutions for digital transformation. So while we intended to focus on Australia, the Union of Arab Banks digital program was an excellent opportunity for us. Incidentally, they had been looking for a platform like Early Birds for 18 months. Most of what they evaluated were procurement platforms, not innovation platforms that solved the business challenge. So that has given us definitely a very unique advantage to us. So at the moment, we focus on early adopters as well as we have a good handle of innovators because of our big data investment. So when we apply the diffusion of innovation theory to our challenge with early adopters, the potential customers is quickly narrowed down to approximately 2% of innovators and approximately 13% of early adopters. So we feel that this group is the real influencer group for sales and business development that we need to, or even startups have to focus and place their efforts. Especially when you meet an early adopter, you are already speaking to a converted. So as an innovator, or I would say startup or scale up, that is exactly where we focus, that we try to connect our innovators with these early adopters who are already looking and actively happy to take some of those risks that most probably some of the other 87% of the customers wouldn't take.
I think that's really comprehensive, very thorough. I think that so I kind of see you guys almost as like a matchmaker for like technology startups to an enterprise. Would you say that when you talked about early adopters, like 87% of people are like afraid of that? I mean, living in Australia, as we all would know, Australians listening to this podcast, Australia is a very reserved market. And I mean, I've worked in corporates before where they're not prepared to go, oh, well, we'll give these guys a go. Do you think that's sort of changing now because people are looking for this disruptive technology and innovation? Do you think that over time corporations will become a little bit more lenient with that, or do you think it'll sort of stay the same for the foreseeable?
I think there's a change afoot, Carissa, because we've been talking to and engaging with some fairly senior officials to understand the very landscape around innovation and what the approach needs to be. And the commentary that we're getting is that things need to change because not only prior to the pandemic, but particularly in the post-pandemic economic environment, we need to be supporting what they're calling sovereign capability and build our local capability. So there's a real desire by some quite senior people to change the way we think about using local capabilities and particularly supporting innovation. So there's a few reasons why that is an issue. Is there's procurement rules, particularly in government, which need to be fine-tuned, but it's more probably about changing the culture in some of the organisations. And you're absolutely right. A lot of organisations are quite risk-averse, and for good reason. And it's a big issue that startups and scale-ups need to address, is the risk factor. That's why we use the term sometimes scale-ups, because the risk appetite on the side of the early adopter can be fairly low for obvious reasons. But then again, there's particularly scope and room for taking risk in an organisation to be able to, even where failure is the result or an outcome. So we facilitate that by keeping the price of entry into the market below around $25,000 or below, so that organisations can trial and test things quickly. And the innovators need to be across this as well, because it's advantageous for them to interact, obviously, with the early adopters. So I think there's some change afoot and a great area to delve into.
So one of the other things I'd like to also ask you, Kris or Jeff, is, Kris, you mentioned before that we're now going to be seeing that shift, but because of that, would you say, is it a fair assumption to say, if I'm a big player in this market and I've had renewed contracts for 20 years, is it fair to say that they should perhaps be, I wouldn't say threatened, but become a little bit on the back foot, that they may be losing work to these smaller players who are perhaps more nimble, adaptable, they've got more velocity? Do you think that that's a point of contention for these guys? Are they worried about that?
Well, you can publicly Google that. You'll find some reports by some very well-known consulting companies saying that change is afoot. It's already here against the usual large multinational organisations that respond to some of these big tenders and contracts. But they need to find some local capability. They need to be more innovative themselves. In fact, we're engaged with a number of them who need to be able to tap into the innovation market much more aggressively, I would use that word. The problem that they have is similar to any early adopter, is that the innovation market is incredibly fragmented. There's literally thousands of over 10,000 incubators and accelerators around the world. There's probably 100 or so, so I don't know the actual number of accelerators and incubators in Australia, but there's quite a lot. But they're all very fragmented, and that's one of the reasons we've created Early Birds, is to help be it a large systems integrator, a business, or even innovator, understand where these innovations lie. So we know from our big data, and we didn't know this before we created our big data capability. We had no idea how many innovative tech companies there are in Australia that fit into that startup, scale-up category. We know there's over 16,000. We couldn't have answered that question 6 months ago because the data's highly fragmented. So organisations need to know what's available locally. And to answer your question is that larger companies need to understand where these innovators are as well and how they get access to them.
So when you deal with these larger corporations, is it kind of hard to sort of knock on these big player doors? Like, how's that sort of been so far, just out of curiosity?
Okay. Well, I can answer from experience working for large multinationals, that they're very difficult to work with for obvious reasons. They've got hundreds or thousands of products and they're usually acquire capabilities through mergers and acquisitions, and it's very difficult to OEM a startup technology into a mature organisation, and that's why you find then startups are going out on their own and creating their own footprint or their own capabilities. So it can be very, very difficult from a tech company perspective, but from integration perspective, you'll hear discussion around in terms of having local content as part of a safe tender response, for example. The problem some of the integration companies have is they don't know where to find that local capability. They're left to their own networks and their own devices, and that's incredibly limiting. So, as I said earlier, that's why one of the reasons we've created Early Birds is, for example, what blockchain capabilities do we have in Australia? Because we need to be building this capability locally, because we're a bit behind the curve in other parts of the world. But there's lots of examples like that.
Now, as you guys are both well aware, you know that I'm a big advocate for technology startups in Australia in particular. Yeah. But what do you think are some of your immediate concerns when you see with companies perhaps that are adverse to working with startups? Now, we sort of touched on that before, but I'd like you to perhaps go a little bit deeper on that so people who are listening to this that are startups can sort of understand from that perspective what some of the challenges they may be up against.
So, Kris, definitely risk is especially always forefront of this discussion. And it covers multitude of concerns across the areas of business, technical and commercial requirements of an early adopter. Initially, we need to know the risk appetite of the early adopter that the startups are talking to. If they or the project is risk averse, they need to find an innovator who is possibly a mature innovator, for example, a scale-up with references and a bit of track record. So this way we can mitigate some of those potential risks. If the project, on the other hand, is leading edge and the early adopter is prepared to take risk with failure being a result, then we can go for an early stage startup. This can work favorably both ways, as the innovator gets to market test their solution and gets to know what is emerging in the disruptive tech market. So there's quite a lot of research in this area with some excellent reports and papers being published. These are imploring early adopters to embrace innovators who are upending the tech sector with disruptive solutions. This means looking at new ways to procure innovative technologies and upskilling the workforce to create digital culture. So innovation, we feel, is everyone's business. It cuts across an organization. A lot of people think that innovation means that we are just going to talk to the IT team. Most and all other areas of organization are impacted by disruptive technologies. So we feel that depending on the customer appetite and depending on the risk they can take, I think definitely there are concerns. But on the other hand, depending on their level of risk and appetite to test something, depending on the project life cycle, I think there are concerns, but there are opportunities as well in the market.
Okay, and look, one of the things I'm really keen to get your thoughts on is startups may have the best solution potentially in comparison to an enterprise, but as we've been speaking about today, they don't have 5 years worth of financial records. They haven't been around the same length of time as some of these other big guys have been to prove their worth and to de-risk themselves from an organization, which of course is incumbent for a procurement process. And as Jeff touched upon earlier, especially when you deal with government, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a real big issue, and this is part of the conversation we've been having with some senior decision makers. Is that how do we nurture and help or mentor those innovators who don't have those references? but it's a great idea or a capability that's needed, particularly needed locally to build the skills and experience here, is that we see some organisations will have an innovation area or a fund for innovation. Some of the larger government organisations, their innovation mentoring program will go on for 2 or 3 years. That's far too long for a startup. They just don't have the deep pockets and to be able to get involved with those projects. So where we're at with the discussion is we are looking at compressing this, talking to agencies, both private and public sector organisations, to compress the time frame to allow interaction with these innovators with a view to taking it further forward, either to evaluate in detail or work on joint ventures or joint projects, or with a view to helping the startup mature their product so it's enterprise ready and supporting those local businesses. I think it needs that type of approach, otherwise we will continue to lag behind and defer to the usual suspects and defer to overseas. So we need that holistic approach to supporting innovators across any organisation.
When you say the phrase defer to the usual suspects, I'm really curious by what you mean by that, but my sort of assumption would be that, well, that's the way they've always done it, so they're just going to fall back on these guys because, again, their hands are tied by procurement and process and bureaucracy and ego. Yep. Is that sort of what you're saying when you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, you can Google some of the large reports that I've mentioned. And I talk about that as well, is that it's all too easy to defer to the usual suspects, but the usual suspects may not provide the innovation you need. They don't have the dexterity of an innovator who's come through an incubation program or an accelerator and has something that's really leading edge, because that they're highly nimble, they're incredibly agile, and they'll come out with contemporary solutions that some of the larger organisations don't have. Sure, the larger organisations, as I said earlier, will wait till it matures and then acquire it. But there's a real need for all of us to embrace these capabilities, particularly locally, if we're going to build sovereign capability across the key areas that we need to be focusing on. I mentioned blockchain is one of them, IoT management, all those sorts of things, the emerging cyber area. So some hotspots in the market that we really need to be assisting and growing locally. And some of this certainly come out in the budget, and there's a number of policy initiatives in place to nurture innovation. But we've got to overcome these procurement issues, and mainly it's a culture and mindset, because it can be done, but we just need to think about it more differently.
So, because these usual suspects, as we'll call them, are sort of winning the work, and I say this politely without kind of really innovating some of them, don't you think that that's kind of doing an organisation a bit of a disservice, where it's like, okay, well, we've just gone for the usual suspect guys because they've been around for 20 years. It's hard to kick them out and get, the new kids on the block. Isn't their role is to sort of secure things, to enhance like technology capability and all that type of stuff, rather than just like sticking with the same old players and potentially getting the same result, or even a worse result in this case?
Well, that's the reason we started Early Birds. It's a real thing that happened to Kris and I, and there were no winners in that, and we're not sure whether the customer has a working capability at the moment. So it's a real issue for everyone. And we're not saying here that you throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but there has to be room for local innovation and local capabilities. Otherwise, we won't build that technology capability that we desperately need as a country to be competitive and stand on our own 2 feet and have those sovereign capabilities that policymakers and decision makers are talking about locally. Things have to change, and we have to make room for our own our own innovators. Otherwise, it's not going to grow. It's there's no revenue for it to access, or no basis for it to access, or you have to go overseas. As Kris said earlier, is that we hadn't intended to take early birds overseas, but we were approached in July, I think it was, asking if we would consider going overseas ahead of our plans. And we've had to, and there's a few tech companies that certainly that happens to, but we still have to grow the local skills and capability.
Would you say, as a rule of thumb, technology startups or innovation are overlooked considerably in terms of just because they haven't been around long enough, would you say? And people are very risk adverse, and no one got fired for purchasing the usual suspects.
Yeah, well, that's true, and risk is an issue that any early adopter organisation has to take into consideration. And Kris went through that, but one of the key reasons they're overlooked is that no one knows what we have in Australia. You would have to individually go to each accelerator or incubator to find out what capabilities are out there. And that's why we've created this big data pool based on the digital footprint of the innovators globally. We have 1.1 million almost innovators in our big data pool. And you need that visibility of what's available locally, so you can then narrow it down to say, okay, out of the 16,000 odd in Australia of innovators, who are they who are addressing a particular issue, who are available in a particular state, their local resources. And we can do that now. We couldn't do that before. And this is what's critically needed, is that we don't know what we know.
So it's what I'm hearing is like a lack of awareness on a lot of these organisations, like what they do specifically.
Well, exactly. So we're talking to lots of early adopter organisations, and they don't know what's available beyond their own networks or their own contacts. So one of our SMEs, for example, SME Consultants, was the global head of innovation for two very large financial services organisations overseas and here in Australia. And we actually asked him, how did he identify innovators? Because he's very much startup, scale-up driven to resolve business problems. And his response was, well, I physically had to go to conferences or particular events to try and identify accelerators in the financial services sector that I was working in. Sure, we've got various forums, but it's a lot of physical activity involved to identify them. And it's too hard if you're sitting in an office working in a particular area to know and understand what's out there.
So would you say more of a digital solution, perhaps maybe better in terms of physically going around, and obviously that takes a lot of time and energy up. Do you think that could potentially be a better solution?
Well, certainly. That's why one of the reasons we created Early Birds, because we knew this was a global problem. So, yeah, absolutely. So we can provide that advice. For example, if someone's preparing a tender response for a particular capability, wouldn't it be great to be able to jump on Early Birds and have a look at, well, what's out there locally that could fit the bill here? Are there vendors out there that have got a minimum viable product that could fit this solution or be part of a component of a broader solution? So we're talking to some large agencies about this at the moment. They just don't have that. Even some of the large facilitation parts of government around technology don't have access to that broad data set.
So what do you sort of believe are the biggest challenges that some of these technology startups face when they're trying to secure larger public and private sector contracts?
Yeah, well, it's visibility of who they are and the fact that they're out there, even if they're early stage, because some organisations could be looking for early stage ideas to put into an R&D program, or they might be looking for something more mature. So it's visibility, and it's impossible for a startup in one part of Australia to get visibility in another part of Australia unless you're involved in various forums, etc. So visibility is a key one. And the second one is that knowing what markets they need to tap into. So we've also discovered that where innovators think that they might only be tapping into a particular market, the solution may have utility in other markets. So we can help expand that as well to understand where the technology could be applied in other markets. So it's visibility, tapping into the market, and particularly the innovators really understanding the personas of who they're selling to across an organisation, not just to a particular area of an organisation, across an organisation, because there's multiple decision makers and multiple stakeholders who are going to be interested in the innovation, particularly if it's solving a particular high-level challenge.
Yeah, and maybe I can add two more points on this, Carissa. I believe that from early adopter point of view, in this context, when we are talking on large public or private sector contracts, there is definitely the culture issue in that specific business, that they need to think about startups and they need to think about disruptive solutions and giving them that opportunity and aligning all of their processes in a way that encourages these innovators to apply for those contracts. But on the top of that, there's another opportunity, what I would say kind of a collaboration challenge between innovators, because most of the time when you're working on large projects or contracts, normally one innovator may not be able to solve the challenge. In that case, most probably there might be 3, 4, 5 of those innovators where they might need to come together to solve a business challenge. And this is why, most of the time when it comes to big contracts, big system integrators win because they bring everything together, and then internally they manage all of that process of collaboration between their different business functions within their organization. So I think there is that big challenge with, especially with the startups and scale-ups, because normally startups and scale-ups are focused on solving one specific challenge out of a big contract maybe. So what they need to think about is how they can collaborate not only amongst other innovators, but also with potentially some other system integrators to add that value and bring it together.
That's a really interesting point you raise. I mean, from my perspective, from what I'm seeing, is that corporations now do want to deal with hyper-specialized organizations. And I think it's probably because back in the day, you'd probably go to one-stop shop that would do everything. And admittedly, there is still a place for those guys. But I think companies now are moving away from, well, this company can only do the whole thing at 80% versus going to 7 different operators that are 100% subject matter experts in their particular stream or their area, right? So I'm sort of seeing now this people focusing on and like sniper rifling these independent firms to say, hey, you're best in breed at doing that one thing, but we're happy to sort of engage you because you're really good at doing that versus, oh, you're 50% at doing that. So that's sort of the shift that I'm now seeing. Would you sort of say that that's going to become more of a thing now? Because, I mean, IT, cybersecurity is very broad. So to know everything across everything is massive. And I think that there are inefficiencies with large system integrators, perhaps because they are so large. And not every single player can be best at everything. And that's just, I think it's just a rule of thumb, really, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you can overlay over that statement the move to technology as a service is that moving to cloud and technology as a service has not only changed the delivery and engagement methods, but also the buyer moving from CapEx to OpEx. So you've got different buyers and stakeholders in the room, and there's a lot more choice. So the customer dynamics are quite different. And the larger one-stop shops are need to compete in a different environment. And this is what some of the reports I'm referring to are talking about, saying that there's a hell of a lot more innovation out there in startup, scale-up world than you may find in a large systems integrator. It's not to mean you wouldn't work with the systems integrator. It means that the systems integrator may be working with startups and scale-ups as part of the solution moving forward because of a requirement that fits the bill. You can't be one size fits all for everyone because there's too many variables in the market. That's one of the reasons that we've created the SME consultants, where we provide innovation as a service, is what we call it, is that there's too many different skills to build into your innovation team. So if you're going to stand up an innovation team, well, what type of specialist do you bring in? It can become incredibly expensive unless you've got very deep pockets. So where do you go to get that advice? So that's why we pivoted and introduced the services capability to help organisations to tap into those skills and capabilities. And this is similar to the problem that you've just outlined, is that the dynamics have changed, and I think it will continue to change, and we may see some government policy introduced to help it change, to build our local capabilities.
So what do you honestly think in terms of, what do you think the landscape will look like for these big players like moving forward? So I think sort of the cat's out of the bag, so to speak, that people are moving away from that type of model. They are going with startups, scale-ups, innovation, and I think that's probably more prominent overseas because Australia is a very risk-adverse country, which I can understand, but I think that's changing as we've clearly articulated and identified on this interview. But I'm really curious to understand, like, what do you think's on the horizon for these guys? Are they going to have to just start acquiring left, right, and centre? Do you think that they're going to have to scale back their services? I'm just really, because these guys have been operating like this for like 30 plus years, and now they're probably thinking, oh my gosh, my back's against the wall, I've got to do something different, and I'm now in really uncharted territory.
I think I'll initially answer that. I think first step is to understand how they would work with innovative startups and scale-ups as part of the norm of moving forward, and understand who they should be working with to provide that local content. And that's getting a better understanding of the local market, engaging with the local innovators and working with them, and having a dedicated program to do that. Moving forward, because it's a benefit to them as well, because they could win more work working with local capabilities, particularly if they're showing that they're building local skills and local knowledge in the context of what's needed moving forward. So that's one of my thoughts. Kris, what do you think?
No, definitely, I totally agree. And I'm just going back to Kris's point in terms of specialization. For example, there is a lot of focus on specialization, and given that a lot of system integrators, in a way, they have specialized units within their businesses, and what they try to do is they try to bring, mostly their internal solutions, but also some external solution to build those capabilities, those specialized capabilities. So going forward, my view is that they have to, and they are already actually, there are a lot of system integrators already either acquiring or partnering with disruptive innovators, both startups and scale-ups, to explore those opportunities, explore joint go-to-market capabilities. So my view is that they have to keep focusing on those specialized skills and specialized areas, because with time there will be more and more specialized contracts and smaller contract than having end-to-end outsourcing contracts that they used to have in the past.
Would you say that the usual suspects are perhaps apprehensive or reluctant to work alongside a startup? Now, my reasoning is because perhaps they think that, well, these guys have been here 5 seconds, they don't deserve this, or they feel threatened that they'll start taking over their work. I mean, strategically, Jeff, you're right. Like, if they were to work collaboratively with them, then it would make sense that they would potentially gain more work. But short-sightedly, perhaps people don't think like that.
Well, I think, and that's probably true also for the things we talked about earlier around early adopters being risk averse or having a culture of putting procurement as a barrier to allowing interaction or working with an innovator. Is that it can certainly be a disadvantage to them, and I think the conversations we've had with quite a few large systems integrators is that they are willing to change, but they're not sure how to go about it because they've not had access to the pool of data. There's been no central pool. For example, if you want to find an innovator, you've either got to go to an accelerator or you may know someone who knows someone. Well, from a business context, that's not strong enough. You need to know, well, what is in that particular cohort across Australia that I can access with, and how do we curate and understand that, how they're going to work commercially. So there's a sort of what cuts both ways is that also the innovators need to be thinking more commercially how they would work with a large systems integrator, because it could come knocking on the door. It did for us with the Union of Arab Banks, come knocking on the door, and we quickly had to pivot and think about how we would work with them and what we would do moving forward, like 12 months ahead of where we wanted to be. So it sort of works both ways, but there's education required on both sides. And I think that's the strength that we bring into the equation, is that we can provide the data to the organisations involved as to who's out there and what they do. We can work with the innovators and accelerators who are keen to work with us. We have an ambassador on our team for accelerators to engage with them because they're keen to engage with industry. There's a few organisations that sort of engage with industry at an accelerator level, but it's sort of one-on-one. It's in Sydney, it's in Melbourne or whatever, and it's fragmented again. So they need to think differently about the way they do it and the way they interact with one another. And again, it's removing those cultural barriers and thinking about it in common sense commercial terms.
In terms of procurement contracts and processes and policies, would you say that they're more likely moving forward to perhaps be a little bit more lenient? And what I mean by that statement is you don't have to be around 10 years to potentially get contract with us. Do you think that they're going to sort of stipulate different terms in their contract because they are trying to build that bit of innovation from the executive level from which you've touched on today? Do you see that sort of changing face as well?
Well, I think for a large contract, you would expect that there'd be references and track record and those sorts of things, and plus your commercial requirements that need to be ticked. But if they can lower the barrier to entry in the dollar value, as we said earlier, our price point's $25,000 to get things moving. Organisations can do that and still work within the letter of the law and the policy to ensure that it's everything's accountable and it's fair and equitable. Organisations can do that and then get to interact with the innovators, understand what they do and help them not only market test but build a track record so that they can compete at a high level as they mature. So there needs to be a sort of like a maturity runway into an organisation. As I said earlier, some of the big organisations have them, and it's a 3-year program, and it's far too long. We haven't got 3 years. We need to move on this as a country fairly quickly and move forward. So as I said earlier, there's a few senior decision makers that are really keen to see this change. And they're looking for advice from their customers. that they work with and the end users who are going to be using these capabilities.
So, what are 3 key takeaways you can provide to startups who are looking to secure larger contracts with bigger corporations? What are some advice you guys could give today on today's interview?
Okay.
3 each. Let's go with that. How about that?
3 each.
And they can't be the same, are the rules.
No, that's good. That's good. I think from my point of view, I would say that the first thing is they need to know their customers. And when I'm saying customers mean they need to know, because given that they are startups, they need to know whether these customers are early adopters or innovators in that categories, because you know that once these customers are early adopters, there is highly likely that they are going to buy from a disruptive innovator. And the second thing, and we have seen this very, very common even with the scale-up companies, that they do not have a why statement. They don't know why about themselves, why they are doing what they are doing, and what problem are they solving and why they are solving that problem. So it's very important to have that why statement, and also a very compelling why statement why they are doing this. And I think, as Jeff said, the third point is be prepared to pivot, because with time, especially when you're working with big opportunities and big contract, there might be an opportunity where those specific customers might, and especially if you're in early stages, if they're asking something specific, you might need to pivot and change you might even need to change your business model and the way you operate, or you might need to change your solution roadmap. And what normally Jeff said, that don't become a victim of founder deafness. That means that you are only hearing what you wanted to hear. You're not listening to the market. You're not listening to your customers, what problem they are seeing and how you are solving their problem. That is where you should be focusing on.
Love it. Okay.
So
Jeff?
yeah, Kris has pinched my notes.
I was going to say, I'm going to be auditing you to make sure they're not the same.
But in fact, I've prepared some notes around what we thought the 3 sort of key takeaways, and Kris has touched on them. It's about knowing your buyer. What I might do is go into a little more detail around that, as it's knowing the personas that you're buying to. And because you're selling into a very different, diverse market, you need to understand those buyers, just not in the CIO's office, but other areas of business. Who in the business is likely to be your buyer, because they may hold the purse strings, because it's OPEX that's being spent, it's not CAPEX. So understand the personas in particular, and develop your marketing and engagement capabilities around those personas and address them, because once you get into a presentation, demo, interaction, you're likely to have a diverse audience in the room. The innovator deafness one is a classic. Was raised with me not so long ago. I was having a discussion with an innovation board level advisor around pivoting, and as a startup or a scale-up, you've got to constantly address the issue of pivoting and not be afraid to pivot. We've had to quite a number of times in the 12 months that we've been actually live with our platform. The innovation deafness is a real thing. Innovators' deafness is a real issue. This is where innovators are not listening to what their advisors are telling them. I've witnessed this overseas, I've witnessed this locally, and it can result in devastating, catastrophic implications for a fledgling innovation business. And that's why engaging with the early adopters early on as possible is absolutely key to getting that market feedback, because if there's no appetite for what you've got, you really have to think about where you're going, or if you're getting advice that you need to pivot, really seriously sit down and think about that.
I myself have learned a lot about the startup space, what we're moving to, and what people should really be focusing on and looking at moving forward. So if people perhaps have a question that I didn't ask you guys today, and I did ask you guys a lot, how can people go about reaching out to you?
We're both on LinkedIn. We are very active and avid users of LinkedIn. So messaging, quite often contacting and communicating with people through that medium as well. Happy to engage and continue the discussion, because we hear our whys about actionable innovation for society, and we're really keen to help and build the local content based on why we started Early Birds.
Well, again, I really appreciate you both finally coming on this show to have that chat, and I think that what you guys are doing is awesome, and I believe a lot more people need to really be aware of how they can potentially get involved and understand a little bit more about what you guys do. So thanks very much once again for your time.
Well,
Thank you very much, Kris, for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have the discussion. Thank you for the questions.
Thanks for tuning in to KB Cast, the cybersecurity podcast for executives. We always value your support and would love it if you could leave us a review or a comment on your platform of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and that's always appreciated. Till next time.